Most political leaders are extremely well polished, with focus groups and other experts helping them stay on message, and makeup artists and other professionals making sure they stay perfectly presentable at all times. All little flaws, wrinkles, or quirks are ironed out or hidden, as the politician wants to avoid even the tiniest thing that could be seen as a scandal. However, some political leaders have managed to get in office either in spite of or because of their quirkiness and their willingness to sometimes create their own gimmick if necessary. In today's video, we're going to go over some of the strangest political leaders in history. Number 10. Saparmurat Niyazov, aka Turkmenbashi, the deceased ruler of Turkmenistan. If you've ever watched the television show Archer, you may have seen the episode Once Bitten, Twice Shy, where the crew goes to Turkmenistan. We've previously covered some of the odd rules forced on the country's people, and the show, despite being a satirical cartoon, has a lot of truth to its weird claims. And it all comes from a man known as Turkmenbashi. As a sampling, he banned ballet, circuses, beards, and gold fillings in teeth, changed 2 of the months of the year to his and his mother's name respectively, and made a national day for both horses and melons. From 1991 to 2006, the country was ruled by Turkmenbashi, who styled himself as a god to be worshipped by his people. When the citizens of the country were interviewed after his death, as his successor slowly but surely destroyed the quirks of his forced cult of personality, nearly everyone who was talked to had met the man himself at some point or another, and many described him as rather shy. Saparmurat was orphaned at the age of 8, and he grew up in what was basically a Soviet group home, so he didn't exactly have a normal life or a lot of stable friends or guardians. Perhaps all the odd rules and the visits with so many random citizens was an attempt by this very lonely man to reach out to others and find some way, somehow, to connect with them on some level. Number 9. Rob Ford, the crack-smoking former mayor of Toronto. Rob Ford was a troubled and bombastic individual who was, for a time, the mayor of Toronto, Canada. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, as he passed away from cancer in 2016, but he left behind a bizarre legacy and left the media and the Canadian public, as well as the rest of the world, with something to talk about for quite some time. He was a relatively overweight individual with a large personality to match, and in May of 2013, a claim surfaced that he had been in a video in which he smoked crack cocaine. He at first denied it, but eventually the video surfaced fully, and in November of 2013, he admitted that he had used crack, but he said he only did it very occasionally, and that it had been during one of his drunken stupors. He refused to resign. However, in April 2014, yet another video emerged of Ford smoking crack, and this time he entered rehab for a few months to deal with his drug problem, but he still refused to resign over this hard drug use when he was in office. In the end, he decided not to run for mayor again in 2016, instead focusing on city council as his health had taken a turn for the worse. He was soon diagnosed with a rare type of cancer known as liposarcoma and was frequently in and out of hospital. Despite his crack smoking and his odd behavior, Ford was still known as a mayor who meant well by the people of his city, and on March 22, 2016, he passed away, leaving behind many family members and friends who loved him dearly. Number 8. Marion, the second elected mayor of Washington, D.C. Marion was the second ever elected mayor of Washington, D.C., and also the fourth. He first served from 1979 to 1991, and again from 1995 to 1999. He was so popular that he was nicknamed Mayor for Life, and only briefly left office between his 2 short stints as mayor of DC because a misconduct scandal caused him to end up not being able to seek re-election. Oh, and in addition to this, he also spent 6 months in federal prison. You see, Marion had a bit of a crack problem, and in 1990 he was caught by an FBI sting buying drugs from a woman who had been a former girlfriend. As he was arrested, he continually complained that he shouldn't have come up here to the hotel room he was caught in, and that the bitch set him up. Despite this, he became mayor again and later served on the city council after that. He was once tried for a DUI but managed to successfully fight the charges. However, he clearly did have a drinking problem, as he had once before been in a traffic stop incident where alcohol was involved, although both times he blew below the limit. He was known for visiting gentlemen's clubs late at night and admitted when he was caught that he was a night owl. However, while he was known for saying a lot of crazy or silly or mixed up things, he actually didn't say much of what people have attributed to him. Snopes has an exhaustive list of all the things that he did or didn't say over the years, in case you wonder which ones were real and which ones are not. Number 7. Arnold Schwarzenegger, aka the Governator. Arnold Schwarzenegger is a larger-than-life personality and mostly known for all the movies he did during his most celebrated period during the 1980s and 1990s. Whether a Terminator, a tough-talking Marine taking out alien predators, or anything in between, he has a cinematic place in almost everyone's hearts. However, long before Donald Trump decided that celebrities could seek higher office in the USA, even without experience, Arnold, as well as his Predator co-star Jesse the the body Ventura was paving the way for him by becoming the governor of the state of California in 2003. His biggest sticking point in life is that he is originally from Austria, so as a naturalized citizen he cannot run for president. He has tried lobbying efforts to change the law before and has considered a constitutional legal challenge as well. Unfortunately for Arnold, no one seems interested in changing the laws just so that he can run for office. Number 6. Muammar Gaddafi was practically a real-life Bond villain. Muammar Gaddafi ruled Libya with an iron fist from 1969 until his death in 2011, when the country finally revolted against him, partly due to the activism centered around the Arab Spring. Now, Gaddafi had been known as a lot of things, such as the mad dog of the Middle East, and also a real charmer in many personal situations, despite the fact that he was such a tyrannical and hard-headed dictator. However, while he may have managed to come across as charming in person to other world leaders, he was not so charming to the people that he abused. While he does seem to have kept his family living a life of luxury, he was also known for keeping a cadre of 30 Amazonian bodyguards that were all female, who were to take a vow of virginity before joining and wear camouflage and heavy mascara. While some people found this fascinating and a bit quirky, when he died his secrets came out, and it turned out even a Bond villain surrounded by suggestively named female bodyguards would have found him overly cruel. Some of his bodyguards claimed that they didn't join voluntarily at all but were blackmailed into it, and many also reported being raped by Gaddafi and his sons, and then thrown aside when they had gotten bored of them. He may have charmed a lot of people and made them think he was just quirky, but underneath it all, he was an evil and abusive man who saw women as nothing more than objects to be used and discarded as he willed. Number 5. Marianne Williamson, the New Age writer and activist running for president. Most people haven't heard of Marianne Williamson before, but now with the Democratic presidential primary, she is starting to become a familiar name. She has never been in politics before, but instead has been an activist, helping fight against AIDS, and has written 13 books, mostly of the self-help variety blanketed with spiritual sayings and phrases. Many of her New Age sayings on Twitter from the past have been giving people great amusement, as she sounds like a cross between a New Age faith healer and some sort of modern-day witch. She had never even held a political office before, but made it onto the debate stage regardless because that was not a requirement to qualify for the debates. Many of those who support her, some of whom started out supporting her ironically, call themselves the Orb Squad and find her constant talk about energies and forces of darkness and light to be refreshing in a world where everything is about political points and wonky policy debates. She has gotten criticism, though, for being against psychotropic drugs, especially for children, and calling vaccine laws draconian and Orwellian. She seems to have completely embraced her quirkiness as a gimmick and is using it to the fullest extent in the hope that it will bring her name recognition. One of her strangest points in the debates was her saying that there was a dark spiritual energy surrounding Donald Trump and that she would overcome him with the power of love. Number 4. Herman Cain, the former pizza CEO who became a presidential candidate. Back in the 2012 presidential race, Barack Obama was looking for and won his second term, and a very wide field of Republican candidates were hoping for a chance to become president, or at least boost their name recognition through a robust challenge against him. This meant many people who were not previously well-known politicians, or even politicians at all, were going for a bite of the apple. And enter former turnaround CEO Herman Cain, who had successfully brought the Godfather's pizza chain back from the brink of bankruptcy and made them a relatively stable business. He felt that as a turnaround CEO and the only African-American in the race, he had a significant chance to make a big splash and maybe even draw black support from Obama in the presidential election. His main claim to fame was a 999 tax plan, which would put federal sales tax, income tax, and corporate tax all at a flat 9%. This sounds like someone who has played a little too much SimCity, as it is incredibly simplistic and would also greatly benefit the rich and not the poor or middle class. Recently, he was in the news yet again when Trump was floating him as a member of the board of the Federal Reserve. After a lot of news stations pointed out his lack of fitness for office, Cain withdrew, claiming that the reason was that the position would mean he took a pay cut. Number 3. Francois Duvalier, aka Papa Doc, aka Baron Samedi, the lower of the dead. Francis Duvalier, also known as Papa Doc, later to be succeeded by his son Jean-Claude, who would be known as Baby Doc, was the ruler of Haiti from 1957 until his death in 1971. While he was originally elected to the office, his regime quickly turned despotic, and he only left office when he finally died and basically sent the birthright rule onto his son. He did this through a combination of his own death squad called the Tonton Macoute root and a cult of personality that was based around himself. He styled himself as an incarnation of the lower spirit of the dead Haitian voodoo Baron Samedi, and regularly talked about his voodoo spells and the way he used them on his enemies. By doing so, he made many people afraid to talk about or plan against him even in private when they knew there was no way he could be listening. The craziest thing he did was claim upon JFK's assassination that it had been his voodoo spell that had done in the President of the United States. Now, while Duvalier did claim to put a death curse on Kennedy, it is unlikely he stabbed a voodoo doll 2,222 times, as some sources at the time claimed, as voodoo dolls are not usually associated with Haitian voodoo. Number 2. Idi Amin, the Ugandan leader who called himself the last king of Scotland. Idi Amin was the president of Uganda from 1971 to 1979 and was known for being a brutal butcher and despot, even becoming nicknamed the Butcher of Uganda. However, he himself did not think of himself as the Butcher of Uganda, but instead liked to style himself as the last king of Scotland, which is a tremendously bizarre claim because, well, Uganda is really far away from Scotland. In fact, people found his claims so bizarre they made a movie about the quirkier aspects of his life called, you guessed it, The Last King of Scotland. Now, perhaps his claim to the throne of Scotland has something to do with the fact that he helped wrest control of Uganda from the British and gave it back to the people. But that love for him, it quickly started to fade. He was ousted in 1979 due to accusations of mass genocide, but he continued to have delusions of grandeur up until his death. In fact, while he was world leader, many other world leaders were worried about his mental stability and what he might try to do at a diplomatic event. The Queen of England, who had received some rather strange love letters from Idi Amin, was worried that he would show up at her Silver Jubilee despite not being invited, and the Queen had already come up with a tongue-in-cheek plan to deal with him if he gate crashed and caused trouble. She planned to hit him over the head with the flat side of her ceremonial sword. Unfortunately for history, Idi Amin wisely chose not to come to the celebration he had not been invited to, and the history books do not have a page where the Queen lays into a rival head of state with her trusty ceremonial weapon. Number 1. Boris Johnson is both the UK's next Prime Minister and a very odd man. For those of you who don't know too much about him, Boris Johnson recently became much more important as he became Prime Minister of the UK on July 24, 2019. Many have called him the British Donald Trump, but the similarities are a lot less than people might think. While both look similar, can be somewhat brash or eccentric for politics, were both born in New York, and both of them have a nationalistic bent to their philosophies, that is where the similarities end. Trump is the sort of man who sometimes takes himself too seriously, but Johnson will walk out looking like he just jumped out of bed while still wearing his suit from the night before. He also once got stuck on a zipline during a publicity stunt during the 2012 Olympic Games in London, and instead of getting upset, tried to use the opportunity and attention to play to the crowd. Johnson cut his teeth in the famous Oxford Union Debating Society. Those who knew him at the time described a man who seemed to sometimes lose his thread because he would momentarily think of a good argument for the other side and forget which side he was advocating for. Even if you disagree with him on his Brexit position or his nationalism, Johnson is a legitimate intellectual and not to be underestimated as some kind of simple-minded buffoon. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, smash that like button below. Also, why not check out my other channel called Biographics? A couple of the people who were featured in today's video we've done Biographics episodes on. Definitely check out the one on Idi Amin. I'm linking to that channel below. And as always, thank you for watching.